You can wear someone's dress. You can stand in their place, but you can never wear their memories. My story is still mine, and no one gets to rewrite it. After I drafted that message, I didn't send it right away. I wanted to be sure I wasn't speaking from raw emotion. I wanted to be measured, composed, dignified, the way I had always promised myself I would be, no matter how outrageous the circumstances. Because this wasn't about proving I could yell louder or hurt more. It was about asserting ownership over my life, my memories, my boundaries. Still, the impulse to act was strong. That afternoon, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, drafting versions of that note over and over. Each time I read it aloud, the words shaped themselves, softening where they needed to, firming where they had to. I've seen the photos of the wedding, the dress, my dress. I want to make it clear that this is a personal boundary. I ask that in future, my history is respected. Short, simple, calm. No blame, no anger, just the truth and a statement of ownership. Before sending it, though, I needed one more thing: confirmation. I couldn't rely solely on social media posts or photos that might have been doctored or framed to mislead. I had to see it with my own eyes, quietly, without anyone suspecting. I called the boutique where I had purchased the dress years ago. They remembered me immediately. They remembered the dress. And after a hesitant pause, the clerk admitted that it had been sold to a woman several months ago. The address and name matched what I had seen online. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a borrowed dress, a mistaken hand-me-down. This was deliberate. The dress had left my life legally and procedurally, yes, but morally, emotionally, that bonds between a person and a memory can't be transferred with a signature. I felt something cold settle over me, a kind of righteous clarity. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't some cosmic accident. It was a decision someone had made, and it was my choice now how to respond. That evening, I sat in my living room, dim light spilling from the lamp, the faint smell of coffee lingering from earlier. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to create spectacle. I wanted acknowledgement, restoration of dignity, and most importantly, a reclaiming of my own emotional space. So I reached out, not to her, not in anger, but to my ex-husband. I typed the message one more time, reading each word carefully. I know about the dress. I saw the photos. I don't need an explanation. I only ask that my history is respected. I pressed send. Almost immediately, I felt the weight begin to lift. Not entirely, but enough to breathe again. Because action doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes action is simply speaking your truth clearly and calmly and allowing that truth to exist without requiring apology or recognition in return. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts. Mutual friends approached me cautiously, some offering quiet support, others hinting at disapproval of the new wife's choices. My ex-husband didn't respond at first. I didn't expect him to. But when he finally did, his message was brief, civil, almost dismissive. Noted. And that was enough. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need him to validate my hurt. I only needed to assert the fact that my past was mine, and that, alone, was a victory. I also began documenting my own memories of the dress, the day I purchased it, the wedding itself, the months leading up to the divorce, the laughter, the quiet moments, the heartbreak, the healing. I wrote letters I never intended to send, spoke out loud to myself, to the empty rooms of my house, and in doing so, I reclaimed pieces of life that had been made to feel shared or disposable. There was a quiet empowerment in that reclamation. It didn't erase the hurt, but it did give me agency over it. I realized that what the dress had represented, the love, the hope, the life I believed in, was not diminished by someone else wearing the fabric. My memories, my experiences, my story remains untouchable. And perhaps most importantly, I understood that the act of reclaiming doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, deliberate, and still deeply effective. Sometimes reclaiming is as simple as saying, "This is mine. This is my story. You may see it, but you cannot take it from me." That night, I sat back on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in hand, and felt the beginnings of a new clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could move forward without the ache of passive disbelief, without the gnawing sensation of violation gnawing at the edges of every thought. I wasn't defined by what someone else chose to do with my past. I was defined by how I chose to respond. In the days that followed, the ripple effects began. Social media, that endless echo chamber of curated lives, made it impossible for the situation to remain private. Mutual friends shared the photos of the wedding, innocent captions like "beautiful day" or "congratulations," not knowing, or perhaps not caring, that each post was a tiny knife twisting in my chest. Some people reached out privately. Old acquaintances sent messages of sympathy. "I can't believe she would wear it. That's so disrespectful." I saw the photos. "I'm sorry, truly." Their words, gentle as they were, reminded me that the betrayal was no longer just between him, her, and me. The community I had once been part of had witnessed it too. And while I appreciated the support, it also added a new layer of exposure I hadn't anticipated. My private grief had become public curiosity. I decided it was time to face the situation with dignity. Not vengeance, not drama, dignity. I drafted a post, not angry, not accusatory, but reflective. A wedding dress is more than fabric. It carries memories, promises, and a part of a person's story. Seeing mine worn by someone else was painful, but it reminded me that my history belongs to me, always. And though others may choose to ignore the weight of past experiences, I choose to honor mine. I hesitated before posting. What if it came across as bitter? What if it provoked more commentary, more speculation? But the thought of staying silent, of letting the situation continue to define my emotional space, felt worse. When I finally pressed share, the response was immediate. Friends, family, even strangers reached out with kindness. Some expressed outrage on my behalf. Others shared their own stories of betrayal, of boundaries crossed, of memories violated. A small community of understanding began to form around the post. People who saw the complexity of emotions, the grief, the anger, the reclaiming of self. Through their responses, I began to see something unexpected. The new wife, the woman who had, unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, crossed into my past, faced quiet scrutiny from some mutual friends. Invitations dwindled, casual conversations were more guarded, and subtle social boundaries emerged. I didn't orchestrate it, I didn't want it, but the truth of her choices naturally led to consequences within our circle. Actions have weight, I realized, and sometimes the moral consequence of a decision doesn't need to be forced. It unfolds organically. My ex-husband, meanwhile, remained distant, civil on the surface, but I could sense in small ways the acknowledgement of the social ripple his choice had created. He didn't call, he didn't apologize, and I didn't expect him to. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my narrative. I had declared, publicly and privately, that my history could not be appropriated. Even my work life was affected subtly. One colleague, knowing pieces of my past, approached me with care, asking if I was all right. Another offered quiet support, sharing that they had once experienced a similar sense of betrayal and had found peace by setting clear boundaries. These interactions, small as they were, reminded me that I didn't have to navigate the fallout alone. I noticed, too, the change in myself. The anger that had once threatened to consume me transformed into a calm vigilance. I was no longer a passive observer of my past being rewritten. I was actively protecting it, acknowledging the hurt, and setting limits where they were needed. And in those quiet moments, sitting in my living room, listening to the hum of the heater, smelling the faint trace of tea and worn upholstery, I understood the deeper lesson of the betrayal. It wasn't about the dress, not really. It was about self-respect, boundaries, and the courage to claim one's own story, regardless of what others do. The public consequences weren't dramatic, weren't vengeful. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches, no online feuds. There were simply the natural effects of choices made. Eyes opening, conversations shifting, social dynamics realigning. And in observing them, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge, but from justice of a more subtle, humane kind. By the time a week had passed, the social frenzy had begun to quiet. People returned to their lives, to their posts, to their routines. But for me, something had shifted permanently. The dress was no longer just a source of grief. It was a reminder that my past, my history, and my dignity were mine to protect, to honor, and to hold sacred. And in that understanding, I found a peace that no social post, no public display could touch. After the initial storm of shock, disbelief, and the subtle waves of public fallout, life settled into a quieter rhythm. It was a new kind of normal, one that felt deliberate rather than accidental, and gentle rather than forced. I woke up each morning with the same sunlight spilling into my kitchen, the same chipped blue mug in my hand, but there was a difference. I carried a lightness I hadn't felt in years, a sense of ownership over my own story that no one could take from me. The dress no longer haunted me. I didn't scroll through photos, didn't replay the memory of her wearing it in my head, not constantly. Instead, I reclaimed the narrative in my mind. I remembered the day I bought it, the anticipation that filled me as I imagined walking down the aisle, the way my mother fussed with the hem, whispering encouragement. Those memories were mine. No one could appropriate them. No one could touch the quiet significance of my personal history. I began small rituals, ways to honor my own journey. I revisited the boutique where I had purchased the dress years ago. I didn't need the dress. I didn't want it back. But standing in that space, touching the fabrics, feeling the faint lavender scent in the air, I could feel the threads of my younger self and my current self intertwining. I bought a small notebook and wrote out the story of the dress, not as an object of anger, but as a marker of who I had been and who I had become. Therapy sessions became more reflective than reactive. I spoke about boundaries, reclaiming personal space, and the quiet, resilient strength that comes from standing firm in one's own truth. I realized that the betrayal had unearthed not just grief, but insight, a moral clarity I hadn't fully possessed before. It wasn't only about a dress or a wedding. It was about learning how to protect one's life story, to preserve dignity, and to define self-worth on one's own terms. In the evenings, I allowed myself quiet contemplation. I lit candles, made tea, and walked around my small home, listening to the creak of floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, the subtle rhythm of life continuing around me. These ordinary sensory details, which I had once taken for granted, now became grounding tools, reminding me of the present, reminding me of my autonomy. I reconnected with friends and family in ways that were gentle but intentional. Conversations were deeper, more meaningful. People who had witnessed the public fallout now had context for my silence, my composure, and my eventual reclaiming of personal power. There was no gloating. There was no need for validation, just acknowledgement. I had faced a profound violation and had emerged intact. I began noticing subtle joys again, the way the winter sun filtered through the kitchen window, the way my cat stretched against my legs in the morning, the warm aroma of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Simple, ordinary moments, but significant in their constancy. Life was no longer measured by someone else's actions or choices. It was measured by how I engaged with my own existence, my own memories, and my own future. The emotional closure didn't arrive in a dramatic confrontation or an apology. It arrived in quiet, gradual ways, in writing my story and asserting boundaries and recognizing that the significance of my experiences could never be diluted by someone else's actions. One afternoon, I received a message from a distant cousin who had seen my post about the dress. "I don't even know what to say, but I'm proud of you. You handled it with so much grace." I read the words and smiled softly. Grace. That was the word I had been searching for, the feeling I hadn't realized I was cultivating throughout this ordeal. Not revenge, not public shaming, not anger. Grace. And with that grace came healing. I understood that I could carry both the pain and the pride simultaneously, that acknowledging betrayal did not negate my growth, and that asserting my story did not require diminishing another person. Months later, I packed up old mementos from that marriage, the photographs, the programs, the letters, and tucked them into a box labeled memories. I didn't discard them. I didn't destroy them. I honored them, placing the box in the back of my closet as a tangible reminder that my past, even the parts that had hurt me, belonged to me. The dress itself, now gone from my life and yet never truly absent from my memory, became a symbol of strength rather than loss. It reminded me that while others could try to claim pieces of my story, I alone determined their meaning. My life, my memories, my dignity, all mine to define. And so I moved forward, not bitter, not cautious, but careful, wise, and aware. I no longer feared that my past could be stolen. I knew now that it could be honored, remembered, and held in its rightful place within me. Looking back, it's strange how a single dress, just fabric, lace, and thread, could carry so much power. Not because of its material, but because of the life I had lived in it, the memories it held, the promises it represented. Seeing it worn by someone else forced me to confront more than just the object. It forced me to confront my own strength, my boundaries, and my capacity to reclaim my story. Life doesn't always hand us justice neatly wrapped, and sometimes the people we expect to protect our history are the ones who disrespect it the most. But in those moments, we have a choice: to let our hurt define us, or to step forward with dignity, to honor our memories and claim our own narrative. I share this story not to vilify anyone, but to remind anyone watching that your experiences, your joy, your grief, your milestones are yours alone. Others may try to overwrite them, repurpose them, or diminish them, but no one can erase the truth of what you lived, what you loved, and what you survived. So I ask you gently, has anyone ever taken something that meant everything to you, leaving you to grapple with the ache of betrayal? How did you reclaim your story? I'd love for you to share in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing or supporting this channel. There are many stories like this, quiet and human, waiting to be heard, and your presence helps honor them. Remember, your past, your memories, and your dignity belong to you, always.